All right. I'm here with Heather Schuck, and she is the co-founder at Elevated Exit. How's it going, Heather?
It's going well. How are you?
Doing great. Doing great. Excited to get to your successes and your current venture. But before we get there, let's talk about your past. What is your background and how did you get into the space?
Okay. Oh wow, I have a very long and twisted background, as most entrepreneurs do. We like the shiny objects, jumping around to different things. My degree is actually in neuropsychology. I worked at a psychiatric treatment home for years. Then I got recruited by an investment firm, and I was a registered associate, stockbroker during the .com burst. So that is where I learned,
So
School of Hard Knocks business, how it actually works. Worked with a lot of entrepreneurs, VCs, private equity, and that was very educational. So did that for several years, and then at that point, I started my own company. And I was a first-time mom. I had my son, and ended up just kind of creating these baby clothes for him that. I'd go to the playground, people would be like, oh my gosh, that's so cute, where'd you get it? And the next thing I know, I was selling baby clothes out of the back of my car. So did that for about 14 years and, had a lot of success. We've sold to just about every single national retailer you can imagine, from like Barney's, Nordstrom, Target, JCPenney. We were in thousands of boutiques all throughout the States and overseas, tons of celebrity clientele on every single publication you can imagine. So, all good things. However, and this is kind of brings us to today, is, the growth part is fun. But one of the things is I never really thought about the day when I would want to move away from the company. And so after about 14 years, it was probably 2 years too late where I, really was needing to exit. I was just burnt out, wanted to move on, ready for something different. And, ended up kind of fumbling through an exit. Probably, it was definitely not, it was a very humbling moment. Let's just say that. But I ended up exiting after 14 years. And then I ended up consulting with other companies, wanting to grow. And then that just kind of transitioned into me doing the fractional chief revenue officer work that I do now and launching my growth marketing agency. So I've done that for several years. And over the years, it seems like we're just taking, like there's more and more clients that are looking to exit as well. And it's something that's very near and dear to my heart because it's something that you can either do really well or really poorly. And I wanted others to kind of learn from my mistakes so they don't have to go through it as well. And so then that just kind of, the next evolution ended up starting Elevated Exit Partners. So, teamed up with a colleague of mine that I'd worked on with, several projects. He was a chief financial officer to kind of tie up all the financial side of it. And then I handled the sales, marketing, and revenue operations and helping companies really solidify their value proposition as they're trying to sell.
nice. Very nice. And I kind of want to take a different approach to this and start with my favorite topic, which is mistakes. Just because it's a good segue. We've all just gone through the gauntlet of the exits, and I think that an important part to talk about is mistakes either that you've made or that you've seen as a trend. And you're dealing with a lot of different entrepreneurs on a regular basis. What can you share around the most common mistakes that are avoidable that you've seen?
I mean, I think I can speak to my own mistakes that I personally made, but also I think it's very common mistakes that other people make, and it's really hard to be objective about walking away from your company. And it's like we all know that, like, okay, you need to be able to hand it off to an operator. Okay, but what does that mean? And you're like, oh, I have my manual. Here's the SOPs. And it's like, check that box. Somebody else could walk in tomorrow and just take over the business. But realistically, there's still a lot of things that you're involved in. The operations aren't running nearly as smoothly as you think they are. There's still, especially when the company is founder led, whether you want to admit it or not, things are happening because your presence is enabling them. And when you take you out of the equation, the business is going to look fundamentally different. And it's really hard to see that for what it is when you're so just in the weeds with it. You're just so caught up in the day-to-day, you can't see that. You really need to have outside third-party objective, look into the business. And it's like, and if you don't want to do that, there's just simple little things. It's like, oh, anybody could run this. We have these, operations all nailed down. It's like, okay, well then get your SOP and the kid down the street that's in high school and have him see if he can execute it. Or, get somebody, from a temp agency and have them come in to the office and then just give them the SOP and see how far they get. And that's definitely something that I always encourage, founders that are looking to exit. They think that they have it buttoned up. It's like, okay, well, put it to the test. And then even, if you want to get even more basic than that, a question I always like to ask, we're walking with a client, and they're like, no, we have most of that stuff figured out. It's like, okay, when was the last time you took a vacation? And if they say, I don't know, it's been a couple years, or worse yet, they can't even remember, well, then obviously it's not as buttoned up and, ready for a transition as you think it is.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that example, the vacation example, because it truly is connected to the value of the company. Like how reliant it is on one individual is just directly proportional to the valuation. And people don't really think about that. They think just exactly as you described, that somebody can just walk in, read the document, and be good to go. And it's just so not true. So the vacation example is a really good one. With other missteps that you've seen, outside of the sort of misconception of SOPs being the sort of document to rule them all, that will help them with the transition, what are some other kind of pitfalls or misconceptions when it comes to getting prepared for an exit?
I think not understanding what is the true assets of your business. And that's something that I experienced very early on. When I had my company just a couple of years, I had got a, letter in the mail from a business broker. They wanted to meet, they had someone who wanted to buy the business. And I at that point, I didn't even fully recognize I had a business. I still thought it was kind of a hobby. And so I was obviously very curious to show up to this meeting. And it's like, okay, so what are they looking to purchase? And I had, all these little sales sheets and, information about the products and like what kind of cotton we used and all the different, protocols that we had to ensure quality and customer service and all these different things. Because I thought the value of the company was this product and service that we were providing. And then, but sitting there in the meeting with all these business brokers and forensic accountants and all these people, they wanted to know about the connections that we had, the contacts, the distribution channels, how much the IP we had buttoned up, what else we could be adding into the product line. And that was very eye-opening for me. And, that can be a little bit, that's a very clear-cut example, but also when you're looking to sell your business, speaking of IP, is it something that you can protect and build a moat around? Because a lot of times you get caught up, well, this is our special way of doing it. Right, but if it's not a patent, if it's not a trademark, it's not copyright, it's something that you're going to have a hard time protecting, which means it's going to have less value. Because the reality is, someone is going to replicate it. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And that's definitely going to impact your value. So what is something you can do to protect it? Can you, trademark a framework? Is there a certain process you can implement in your manufacturing to patent it? There's different things you have to get creative, but figure out how to have a true asset that can't be replicated. I think that is definitely something to consider as well.
Yeah, and before we were recording, I talked a little bit about the sales pipeline aspect, and many people that I have met do not really bring up pipelines very frequently when it comes to conversation. So it's not a top of mind for a lot of founders that I know, but I do know from personal experience that it is a key ingredient to an exit, is talking about the pipeline, what's coming, how fast is the freight train moving, or how slow is it moving. And I think that it's so important to talk about that when it comes to valuing the future, because the client, or the buyer, as we talked about before, is buying the future. They're buying the growth. They're buying the potential. And the pipeline is basically your glimpse kind of into, what can be taken to the next level. So let's talk a little bit about that for a second. Like, what is that role of the pipeline, and how can people maximize that when they're going through something like an exit?
Yeah, I think there's a couple different stages to it. First of all is, the past. You want to absolutely quantify the past. And a lot of times people make assumptions about that they have their sales process figured out. And it's like, okay, it's 4 steps. And it's like, when a call comes in, we hand it to Bob. That's not a sales process. You need something that is like tied into technology, and it can be measured, and it's not with you and a pencil doing tally marks. It's something that is, in your system, your CRM, that you can absolutely quantify, and there's data behind it. So then there's step 1, because that's the foundation. So then you can figure out, okay, how do we optimize this? How do we, move? What are the different what's the growth story? If this person wanted to come in, depending on what they wanted to invest, what could this potentially look like? So one of the things that, we really, I like to do with clients is we, come up with their growth story. So this is where you're at. This is all the steps that took you to get to this point. Going forward, this is the optimization that you could do to get to X, Y, and Z, depending on which level of investment. And, if you wanted to integrate, new staff, AI, if you wanted to invest, additional capital, if you wanted to, give different scenarios, because then that allows the buyer to, really step into it and kind of see that future state. Most people just don't have the vision. They're just looking at the numbers. They don't know what it could potentially be, especially because they're not in the business like you are. They don't know what you see. They don't have that same lens. You really have to paint that story for them. And, another thing that I always urge my clients to do is, because I see this happen over and over again, is, that you get to a certain point with the numbers, and then they kind of create this laundry list of like, but it could grow if you did blah, 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 blah. And they just have this like list. And then they give it to the buyer like that's magical. And it's not. It's just, it's a bunch of unvetted, like you could have had ChatGPT do that. Like, it's worthless. It doesn't really translate to anything. So really, if you want to use that pipeline and your growth story to help increase your valuation, you need to identify, 3 opportunities that you really believe in, and then start going down that path. So if you can start showing some early traction, and you can show that you already have the infrastructure in place to take advantage of these opportunities, like you say you do, if you can prove that, well, then, you just need to pass the baton to the buyer so they can, run with it and take advantage of that growth that you've already kicked off for them. There's a tremendous amount of value in that. And that's not, just somebody, passing off a to-do. It's setting them up for success and making it more realistic that growth is actually going to come to fruition.
Yeah, I like that. Identifying a couple different opportunities. And there was a previous episode, I forgot who was on the pod. I feel bad that I won't give them credit, but in the diligence process, basically they had set up sales milestones and said, I'm going to hit these numbers in 1 month. Let's say the diligence process is 6 months or 4 months, 5 months, whatever it is, and literally would crush the sales milestones by doing what you're talking about, of identifying a couple opportunities that they were confident in, and almost making it so that it's a proof as you're going through the diligence process that it's still, moving in the right direction. And it's a small kind of nuanced thing to be transparent about with a buyer, but it's powerful because it's just kind of an execution proof, and removing yourself if you can, saying like someone else could drive this is another ingredient there. But I want to shift to timing because that's like probably the most important piece. A lot of people ask about it. I'm always curious of what people's takes are on when the right time to sell is, but I'd love to get your opinion on when timing is crucial.
Yeah, I mean, every situation is different. But I'm, from my past experiences, I'm a big proponent of, preparing to sell your company the second the ink is dry on your incorporation letters. You need to always be prepared to sell it because it helps you not get too attached and to be objective with everything moving forward. Now, if the reality is most people, and, this even plays into what we were just talking about, hitting those sales milestones and why that was so powerful is, the reality is most people wait too long to sell until they're completely burnt out and the business is not performing well just because they just don't have it in them. I mean, I went through it exactly with my own company. I knew how to grow it. We had phenomenal success, but when I got to the point where I was just so burnt out, I knew what I needed to do. I just couldn't do it. And so you got to try to consider the exit before you're getting to that point. So I think it's really helpful to set up milestones in your business to where like every year, annually, you're going to have a gut check of like, okay, where are we at? What is the exit goal? And are we there? And, be honest with yourself about that. And then ideally you're going to get to that. You're going to start to feel that itch and you're going to be like, okay, it's getting to that point where I think we need to start exploring options. Ideally, you give yourself at least 3 years. 3 years gives you an opportunity to take advantage of a lot of, tax strategies. If financials need to get fixed, you can go back and, resubmit your taxes. And there's different advantages that you're going to have that's going to protect you financially once you sell. But it also gives you tons of time to prove the revenue, make sure everything is documented with the sales process, marketing, solidifying everything. Now, I know that is often not very realistic. Usually when people get to the point that they want to sell, it's, like within the year, and I think in those situations, it's definitely possible. I think you just have to be realistic about how it's going to impact your valuation. And as long as you're willing to accept the consequences of not giving yourself enough time to extract the full value out of your company, it's absolutely doable, especially in this market. It's definitely lots of buyers out there. Even if your company isn't completely buttoned up, it absolutely would sell, just probably not for your ideal valuation. Mm-hmm. But, the more that you can do to set up the processes, the operations, make sure that your sales and marketing and financials are completely rock solid, it's the best you can do.
Yeah. Yeah. And kind of going hand in hand here, let's talk about like cost cutting with let's say driving profit versus top line kind of growth initiatives, because there's a lot of, everybody's different. Every business is different, of course, but I think that there's some interesting knowledge that you may be able to share here around the two levers there, where you have your profit and then you have like your buyers that are interested in top line, which in my experience is less than the people interested in the bottom line. But what's your take on those two types of initiatives?
I think we're at a very interesting point in the market and technology in general, there's a lot of opportunities out there to do that, where you can, cut costs and add value. And one of the easiest ways to do that is just integrating AI. it's going to exponentially increase the value of your business because you're modernizing it and you're also systematizing it. And then you're not having to hire more people. Typically, you can downsize a bit with, when you leverage AI. So that's definitely something that I encourage my clients to explore. And there's, AI agents are so much more accessible now. It's not that complicated. It's mind blowing the things that you can do now versus, a year ago, honestly. It's so absolutely explore options. I know it's one of those things where I think, because I have these conversations with my clients, they're like, yeah, but we want to sell. Like, we don't want to get further involved and, invested with the company. We'll let the buyer figure out like the AI thing. But you're really, you could get so much more out of the valuation and you would be so much more of a compelling acquisition target if you already started to integrate these things. Because once again, just like I was saying earlier, showing them, that it can happen and to where they can see it is going to provide a lot more value than just adding it to the to-do list of like, oh, you could do this and you could cut such and such in half, or you could, go from having a staff of 8 to a staff of 4. Showing that is going to be way more powerful.
Well said. Well, that takes us to the finale. Knowing what you know now, what would you tell Heather 10 years ago?
I would tell Heather to have, to definitely start with the end in mind. And I think that is the easiest way to make sure that you're getting, the full return out of the, blood, sweat, and tears that you're pouring into your business. And I think that's definitely one of the mistakes that I made. And, and it created so many different things. Just like my company, I leveraged my personal brand a lot, which was incredibly rewarding and effective, but it also sabotaged the sales. So it's, there's the pros and cons. And I think it's a lot easier to evaluate when you're thinking about the ends instead of just being caught up in, this is exciting. This will get us through the year. Well, if you want to sell in 5, what's going to give you the best chance of getting the valuation you want in those 5 years?
Yeah. Yeah. And a bonus question, I think when it comes to who the buyer is, strategic versus PE, what's the best route in your experience when you're talking to entrepreneurs when they're trying to kind of weigh those up? Obviously, there's a lot of different opinions around this, but in your experience, what's your take?
I think that I've just, I've seen it play out so many times. I think that it's, planning for a strategic investment, buyer is far more advantageous than the private equity. Because the reality is, I think it's good to have both. And I think that you should, absolutely explore both options and, evaluate each deal. But I'm the person, with my growth agency that is getting hired by the private equity firms to come in and help fix the company that they just acquired because the founder isn't getting their earnouts because they're just over it. And the founder had signed a deal that he was going to stay on board for, 2 to 3 years to help the company hit all these, and the reality is, we have to be honest about who you are. If you're an entrepreneur, once you've moved on mentally, you've sold the company, it's no longer yours, you're going to be checked out. Whether it makes financial sense or it's logical or whatever, we're human. And you're not going to be as invested as you were when you were the owner. And you need to be very honest with yourself about that. And those, staying on for 2 years, those could be the longest 2 years of your life. And it's sabotaging all these other opportunities. And it, kind of creates a situation where you're just stuck in this purgatory and no one's really benefiting. So I definitely kind of grill my clients on that and encourage them to really dig deep and do a gut check of, are you really willing to be invested in somebody else's company for 2 years? And, most of the time it just doesn't make sense.
Well said. I think that's so true about the founder relationship post-sale, for sure. Well, those are all the questions I have. Where can people learn more about what you're working on?
Yeah, absolutely. You can visit elevatedexitpartners.com. And then also, I'd encourage everyone to just reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on there. Heather L. Schuck. Yeah.
Awesome.
Send over connection request.
Very cool. Well, wherever you guys are listening on iTunes or Spotify, links that Heather mentioned will be in the show notes. But thanks so much for coming on and sharing your story.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.